Well, in the Bible, there's 500 verses on prayer. There's 500 verses on faith. There's over 2,000 verses that concern money. Jesus taught 38 parables, 16 of them of money.
Wow.
So if the church is shying away from a conversation, we're actually shying away from a conversation that Jesus didn't shy away from.
You're listening to the Isn't That Rich podcast, and we're your hosts, Jill Franks
and Ashley McVicker. As young females in the banking industry, we love simplifying the confusing yet everyday questions you have about money.
Like, how do I get my finances in order?
Where is my money really going?
How do I invest for my future?
How do I make my money work for me?
Can I really afford to buy that new home?
These are the questions that keep us up at night. And the truth is, no one was born knowing how to handle their finances.
And chances are, walking into a bank to ask for help seems intimidating.
Whether you're a single person in your early 20s saving for your first home,
or you're an empty nester wondering what to do with that extra spending cash,
this is the podcast for you.
And we're excited to be here today because we have a extremely special guest
Yes, he is so important to us. He is a big light in our life. And not only do we go to church with him, but he is our pastor, and he also works for our insurance agency.
Yes, he wears so many hats, but today we are going to be talking to our pastor.
With the pastor hat, yeah.
Yeah, so be sure you're putting on the pastor hat.
Today we're going to be talking about stewarding your finances, and what a better person to talk to than Pastor Jason Mckinnies.
We are so thrilled to have him on today and pick his brain because he's also an excellent businessman, and he has not always been a pastor, and he has a history in the business world. So without a further ado, welcome Jason.
Welcome,
Mckinnies.
Pastor Jason.
Well, it's a joy to be here. Two of my favorite people in the world.
Well, we think you are the absolute best. First of all, I just want you to kick us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your life.
Well, see, I'm married to Melissa, which is probably the most important fact of my entire life is I'm married to Melissa, who keeps me organized, believe it or not. I don't have an executive assistant. I don't have an assistant or a secretary. So that pretty much goes to Melissa to make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be and doing what I'm doing. 2 daughters, and a 22-year-old daughter now, and a soon-to-be 16-year-old daughter, so God help us. I was in the corporate world for quite a few years, and then left the corporate world to come to Marion to pastor what then was Southern Illinois Worship Center, and then been here since 2009.
So you're from Indiana.
Was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, so go Irish, a Notre Dame fan. Was born there, met Melissa, moved. My background was trucking. So I started lining brake shoes when I was 7 years old. And my dad was vice president of a truck parts place. And so I would go to work with him on the weekends and empty out the trash and do all these odds and end jobs. Did that till I was like 16 years old. And then Dad said, you need to make your own way.
So at 16?
At 16. So started working and did some odd jobs back then. Minimum wage was $4.25 back then. So I'm now that guy that can talk about, back in the day. Yeah. And got a job working for Associates Bank Corp, which was a credit card processing bill processor for MasterCard Visa, and did that in high school. So minimum wage was $4.25. I was in high school making $12 an hour. Did a few odds and end jobs, and then, stayed in the trucking, worked for Freightliner until I met Melissa, worked for Volvo. And then went to work for Centos Corporation and worked my way up there and left Centos to come here. I got about a little over 10 years of free education from Centos and learned a lot. Almost all the principles that we run at the church, the policies, the procedures, the processes, everything is the same processes and policies and procedures I used at Centos. And they've been very good to me over the years, still are very good to me. The byline of everything that we did there, every email, everything you did was honesty and integrity in everything you do and say. So I never had to sacrifice who I was on a spiritual level or my morals or my integrity to work in the corporate world. I hear a lot of people talk about, well, in the corporate world, you got to sacrifice this and all these really obnoxious stories. It was not my experience in the corporate world. Tremendous people that I worked with, I still communicate with those people. There's still opportunities there for me to gain information or ask questions. When I left there, I wasn't going to work for a competitor. I was going to live out my dream, and they were very respectful of that and have remained that way for the past almost 14 years. So I have nothing but good things to say about that company, the people that I worked for, the leadership there. That I learned a tremendous amount of things from those people, and I still practice them in my life. Matter of fact, going into that company, between Melissa and Cintas, it changed my view of finances tremendously. Even though and I kind of made a statement there on purpose about I was making good money at Associates Bancorp, but I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't know how money worked, how money could benefit me. I didn't understand debt ratios. I didn't understand any of that. And so my credit was a mess when I met Melissa. And now I have a better credit score than Melissa, but that's been because she's worked on it and whipped me into shape. And then on the corporate side, I learned so much about financials, how to handle that. And so if I would have known when I was 18 years old what I know today, man, things probably would be considerably different. And so as we begin to pastor the church and do those things, I wanted to try to teach people on those levels not to make the mistakes that took me a little while to bail myself out of, and what money can do and how money can be handled. And I know pastors talking about money usually makes people really squeamish, but
I think it's amazing that God set you up in that position to learn all of those things and set you up for what you're doing right now.
oh, there's no doubt that God, the education that God allowed me to have at Cintas, the Cintas gave me, prepared me, the grind. That company was, it didn't matter what you did last week, it's what you did this week. Well, that's very much, when I say amen on Sunday, the grind. Ashley used to work for us at the church. That was a real bitter pill to hear that whole story there, but no. She used to be our marketing and spokesperson. So, the grind is real in the church world. Sunday is always coming. It just, and what you did last week doesn't matter. You got to do something different. And then you've got the holidays, you've got all these things that are going into it. Then on top of that, not just what the service does, but then what we deal with on a day-to-day basis as pastors from, my meetings yesterday were with HR representatives around Southern Illinois and how we could help get people jobs, but also prepare people for jobs and the companies that are looking for people. So I get every week, I lost my job, I need a job, or my son needs a job. That isn't coming to sermon preparation. That's just all the other things that go into a Monday through Saturday part of being a pastor. So Cintas helped me with understanding what the grind was and preparing myself and building up the stamina for the grind of being a leader. And then, all kinds of other opportunities that come my way. And whether I have the ability and the stamina and the capacity to manage those. So Cintas was great for me in those areas and prepared me to pastor.
It's so true that there is so much more to a church. I mean, we don't see the grind of it, the everyday. And I think of our job, Ashley, and what we do, and to put on an event, I think about what goes into it. And like you said, Sunday is always coming, and it's the main event, right? So all this work leads up to that, and it's nonstop. And there's a lot more than we see just sitting in the congregation.
Well, I listened to your podcast with Taylor Shanks about where you're getting married. It was the week of Valentine's Day. And I listened to that, and we're involved in those conversations from our level. I married you and your husband, and I'll probably do the same I did with your sister. And when we find a rich cowboy, we'll get that done for you.
Hello.
Yeah, so if you're a rich cowboy, she's taking applications, but they have to come through me first. But the proper way of handling finances I thought that episode of this podcast was amazing to prepare people for what goes into that. And as a pastor, you're dealing with that. So that's a life change that's happening to people, and you're trying to discuss that with them. The other end of things is at the end of life, and the amount of times that we're involved in end of life discussions and people's finances. Just a few days ago, I was with a woman, and we're setting up the trusts, trying to get all these things prepared for them. And I didn't know a lot about that until I dealt with my own father's end of life and those discussions that happen, all of the legal loopholes, all the things that go into that. And so we begin to change how we handle that, even at the churches, to begin to talk to people about, you need to prepare yourself. And one of the best benefits that you can give to your family after you're gone is to have handled things before they have to make the decision. And the bank can play into that. What I do at the bank, what I do at the insurance agency, what I do in the church level. These are 3 areas of people's lives, spiritually, financially, and then just protecting yourself, that really, if you don't handle them, can have some drastic repercussions in your life.
It seems like a lot of people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, we always say those taboo topics, right?
Right.
When my oldest daughter turned 21, so anytime that I travel, I send, just in case email. And I used to send it to my dad. He was the power of attorney. If something happened to me, I would list out, and here's the combinations to my sakes, and here's where this is, and what this is, and here's my insurance policies, and all those things. And then when my dad passed away, it went to my brother. Well, now I have a 21-year-old, or at that time, 21-year-old daughter, and so her mom and I were getting on a plane, and she got this weird email, and she calls me. She's like, "What in the world is this?" I'm like, "Well, you're of age now, and you shouldn't have to go rummaging through my things or trying to figure this out or figure that out." And so I just draft an email, and it's a form email now, and I just make changes to it here and there. And when I'm going to travel or there's some risk involved, that way they're not trying to figure out what was dad thinking or what was this. And I went through that with my dad. My dad was laying on his soon-to-be deathbed, and all he told me was, "You have my phone." I remember, "Yeah, I've got your phone." He was, "Well, there's 5 documents you might need." And I've spent the last 5 years trying to decipher 5 documents because there was no conversation. It was just some passwords. And so trying to figure all that out, my dad was not prepared to die. And I don't think anybody wants to talk about being prepared to die, but yet, unless the Lord comes, we're all at some point or another going to have that moment happen. And so end of life and preparing for it, and everything that I do, let's prepare for end of life with insurance and banking, but then also let's prepare for another facet of our lives, which is eternity. So I'm a pastor, so we're going to talk about that. But all of those discussions that we have to have with people, they're not discussions that people have, but they're necessary. And you have to find people that you trust in order to have those conversations to properly prepare yourself and your family for what could happen or is ultimately going to happen, and prepare your family for it. Because I've sat in some rooms with people who've argued and fussed and their family disintegrated. And all of that disintegration of the family could have been handled had there been a conversation or preparation for it.
I bet people look at you as a pastor, and whenever a divorce happens or a death in the family, and they come to you and they talk to you about their emotions, but a lot of people probably come to you to talk about finances.
More than you ever imagine, financial conversations, because money is involved in every aspect of it. You're going to get married, there's going to be a conversation about money. We talk about it in pre-marriage counseling. What are you going to do with your money? You're going to have separate accounts, joint account, all those things that go into that. Money plays into, we use the word money, but it's finance. It's because there's a lot more to it, because often when we use the word money, we're thinking about cash money. But the financial status of where you're at plays. I think 80% of all divorces, finances is the leading issue. It's a money issue. I would tell you that most families, after a mom and dad pass away, the issue comes down to the finances. I didn't get this or whatever it may be. So we're involved in those conversations like crazy. So often most pastors or spiritual people shy away from money because other people have abused the conversation about money. And you guys are both members of our church. We very much downplay what most churches would call the offering. We downplay it. Because churches have mishandled money, leaderships have mishandled money. We thought we would take a different approach on it. And the people say, well, I didn't come to the church to talk about money, but ultimately we'll talk about it in some way or another in the church setting, in a counseling session, just a normal conversation, we're going to have to talk about finances because it's what either drives people to success or drives them to separate.
And there's a lot of biblical truth behind finances, and there's a lot of things in the Bible about finances. So if you're shying away from financial topics, really you're shying away from something that the Bible talks about.
Well, in the Bible, there's 500 verses on prayer. There's 500 verses on faith. There's over 2,000 verses that concern money.
Wow.
Jesus taught 38 parables, 16 of them about money. So if the church is shying away from a conversation, we're actually shying away from a conversation that Jesus did shy away from. And there's a difference between talking about money and talking about giving. There's a difference there. And it's how we handle it. And I think most people don't understand about money. Now, again, I'm going to come at it from a pastor. You asked me to have the pastoral hat on.
Yeah, we're your pastoring athlete.
So I think the biggest issue with money with most people is you got to figure out who owns it in the first place. And if you think you own it, you'll handle it differently. But if you understand it from a Christian perspective, that God owns the money, Psalm says that earth is his and the fullness thereof, so it's his, then you'll handle it differently. If I am the steward of something, then I'm much more careful with it because somebody else, I have to give an account to that for that, versus I can do whatever I want. So there's an interesting little story. I read it years ago in Reader's Digest, so I'm an old guy now. I used to read the Reader's Digest all the time.
So did I.
But I used to just read it for the jokes, scan through it. There was a woman sitting in the airport and she had bought a bag of cookies and she sits down at a table like this and she's got her newspaper and she sits, there, reaches up and grabs a cookie and eats it, and she hears a rustling of the paper from the gentleman that was on the other side of the table, and he reached up and grabbed one of her cookies and he ate it. And she didn't want to cause a scene, so they kept, doing this. She'd grab a cookie, and then he'd grab a cookie. And she was just getting angrier and angrier by the moment. And so finally, the cookies were all gone, or there was down to the last cookie, and he took it and broke it in half and gave her half, and he ate half of it. And she's just really angry. Now, this guy's helped herself to the cookies, and now they're sharing these cookies. And so she gets up, and she leaves. She's going to go catch her plane. She opens up her purse to get a boarding pass, and there's her bag of cookies. She was getting angry that he was eating her cookies, but they weren't her cookies, they were his cookies. And so who owns it is how you view it. She was very angry because she thought she owned those cookies, when in fact he owned them, and he was being the one that was being nice and generous. So when you understand who owns something, your opinion of it changes. And when you realize that God actually owns everything that I have in my life, it's because of God. I have sat in rooms and sat with people, the opportunities I have, without the Lord in my life, I would have never met you two. I would have never met any of the people in Southern Illinois. So the orchestration of God in my life has provided that. So I handle it differently, understanding that I didn't do it. I have to give an account for it. As God has put these things in my life, I can't just handle it any old way I want to. I have to give an account for it. Because you have to give an account for it, you're accountable for it. That changes things. In our own finances, when we come to that moment, we'll start changing the way we do it. Will I waste it? Will I just throw it away? Whatever it may be. I've heard people say, I've thrown $100 away before. I'm like, well, listen, if we were driving down the road and Melissa opened up the window and threw a $100 bill out, we're going to stop the car and we're going to go back and get it. Like I never allowed my kids to throw money into fountains. I don't know if, I'm like, I work, that we're not just going to throw that in the water and leave that there,
Make a wish somewhere else.
I was the guy diving in.
Nope. No wishes for you. Yeah.
Like there's a penny laying to my left. It will be picked up. I just view it differently.
So when you grew up in church, do you think that the churches you went to managed money well, or talked or taught about money at all?
Tithing was taught, giving was not. Tithing was taught, financial stewardship was not. And tithing was always given to us as a heaven or hell issue, and never understood the principles of it, never understood why we did it. It was just, you're going to do this. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that conversation from the church, most people are saying, you want me to do what? You want me to take 10% and do what with that? And let's just talk about in today's age. You want me to give in the church, but egg prices have went up, milk prices went up, gas prices have went up. How do we do that? I think the better conversation is, how do we create good financial stewards? And then teach the principles of giving, because giving is more of out of the heart. And, there's a whole different view on tithing. I'll get into a biblical, doctrinal discussion, a theological discussion. But in Christianity, giving is everything. And God usually tests the two areas that we want to hang on to the most control of. One is our heart, and second is our finances. And so when we talk about giving in the church, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about giving of ourselves, giving of our time, giving of our heart, all those things, and giving of our energy. Giving encompasses more than just money. So growing up, no, I did not hear about it. And that's why, until I met Melissa, until I got into the corporate world, I did not understand what stewardship was about and how to steward what had been given. In most cases, if I had enough money, I was making enough money, I didn't care about the outflow. I was just basically, we would call that living paycheck to paycheck. I made $500, I could spend $500. And never considered saving, never considered investing. I wish I'd have bought Apple, Tesla, all those things, but I didn't understand that. That was not taught. And how to invest or how money actually worked. Okay, so no, I did not learn that in church. And I thought, well, we have to change that.
And I love that you brought that up. At our church, SIWC, now Purpose House, you offer these financial freedom courses and hold space for people to ask those questions. And I love that. And what drove you to actually host that space for your congregation and our members of the church?
So I went to buy a car. Melissa and I were married. I was working. I was making great money. I went to buy a car. And the gentleman who come out to tell me that I didn't qualify for the loan did not do so in a very tactful way. And it embarrassed me. And I decided right then and there that I would never be in that place again. And then as I got further on in life, I realized, there's a lot of people who are experiencing that same thing. They're now not able to do what they want to do or what they need to do because their credit score is low, their finances, whatever that may be, and they're being embarrassed. And I wanted to solve that issue because I know how I felt. Thankfully, I had a wife who helped me understand it, at a corporate world that helped me understand it. And so when I had the opportunity then to influence it, I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. So we started with the Dave Ramsey course in financial peace. It's the one program in our church, though, that we do not offer scholarships to. We want people to learn that the power of money is first investing in yourself. And so we don't scholarship anybody in the financial peace. They have to pay for the books. They have to pay for all that to get into that class. The first investment should always be into yourself. So we're trying to teach that through that principle. I'm not going to pay for you to go. You have to care enough about yourself that you want to invest in yourself to pay for that course. Then, we teach some other classes. There's a lot of things we even have. There's a lot of people who work at Farmer State Bank that come to our church. There's a lot of other bankers that come to our church. We've tried to utilize those skill sets to teach people. We offer private counseling. We offer classes. We have, presidents of banks sitting down with young people who are getting ready to be married and saying, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what you're going to do when you buy your first home. Let's talk about mortgages, talk about interest rates. Let's talk about all of those things. Ask those questions. If we can get it settled before, then we're easing the job of the pastor, not having to talk about marriage counseling because we talked about it ahead of time. So we try to offer all of those courses of what's happening in people's finances and offer whatever resources we can. But there again, somebody has to be willing to give their time. And we have a lot of tremendous people who do that. Don't ask me to teach the financial piece thing. I've done it, but I've never taught it. Melissa and I did the snowball effect. We did all those things. And our church is debt free because I believe that the corporate church, if we're going to ask people to live a certain way, the church should practice what it preaches. That includes me. And so we began that philosophy. When I first came here in 2009, we were $400,000 in debt. And the founding pastor had passed away, and the church had dwindled in size. And so they had this large amount of debt, and now they have a reduced amount of people trying to pay it. And the church couldn't do what it wanted to do. When it came to hiring even myself, the church was limited in what it could offer to a pastor, so they were limited. I took a great risk to come. They leaving the corporate world to be a pastor of a church that was, literally strapped. We paid the debt off in 3 years. We paid the debt off for 3 years now, and then we built somewhere in the vicinity of about $7.5 million worth of buildings. We've done it debt free, and invested almost $12 million back into our entire campus, so that we've done it debt free. But we've lived what we've preached. And so you can't go to tell somebody, hey, you get out of debt, learn how to give, learn how to steward, when what they're investing their time, effort, and energy is not doing the same. So we can say, hey, this is who we are, how we've done it. It's worked for us. And now we're not strapped. We can hire quality, high caliber people like the Ashley McVickers of the world, who are coming out of college. And the church, the whole concept of the church began to change. Was we're no longer underneath it. We're now above it, and we can produce what I feel like the church and the image of the church should be, which is not that we're broken in debt and beat up and busted. Instead, we're the influence instead of being influenced. And I think that the church should be the leader in every area of that. And my personal belief is, as a church goes, so goes the city. And I look around in this region, when we came here, and when I first came here, there was a Drury Inn and a Bob Evans, and I think the Steak and Shake and Applebee's out here. Now we have Starbucks, we've got all, the city, what's happening around us. But all of that is through the proper stewarding of finances on every level. On every level.
You mentioned something I want to highlight, and that's not easy and not common. Through your leadership and practicing what you preach, you've built a beautiful church that just opened campus almost a year ago now, completely debt-free. And that's not common or a normal thing that churches do, and I think it's so wonderful.
Will you tell us the story about how you got on the plane, and you said that you knew COVID was going to happen, and how it was going to affect the church, how many people were going to be attending the church at the time, and how did that affect the money at our church?
Yeah, that's the COVID was fun for pastors. But we had, I would say 2013, we started preparing for what we felt like was going to be a change in the way church did business. We began to invest in areas where most churches probably weren't investing. And so the day that the switch flipped, we were prepared. Technologically, we were prepared. And in no way that's not an indictment towards the business. It's just how we had to manage our house. And when I got on the plane, the Lord just began to speak to me about what was going to happen through it.
So this would have been right before COVID, right?
So this would have been March of 2020. I was on spring break in Los Angeles with my family. And I was supposed to travel home. I was flying home on that Saturday to meet with the original 92 members of the church that elected me. And I was going to tell them we were going to change the name of the church. And it was going to roll out in April. And instead of being on spring break and having this good old time, I'm watching the president and all this stuff on, and we're having all these new meetings, and I flew home, and instead we closed the church. It was, what are we going to do? But all the plane ride home, this is going to change the whole outlay of society. And it has, even though we're starting to come back around to normal, there's been a lot of things that will be forever changed through those 2.5 years of the height of COVID. And so we just said, okay, what does that look like through our finances? And we were in a position, we had, I think, 19 full-time staff members at the time, plus the people, those retirements that we were paying, all those things. Is we're like, okay, well, we were in a financial position that everybody was guaranteed a paycheck. We were not, there was no layoffs through the entire process of it. We didn't take up an offering. We just started taking up the offering at the church in the last month or two or so. But we didn't take up an offering at all. Yet giving increased beyond our imagination. Everything began to just fall into place. And even though the church kind of went smaller in numbers wise, the people were committed to it and kept it going. We built. We actually spent more money in the construction phase of COVID in the building than we did pre or post COVID. We were outlaying millions of dollars into our building and doing it debt free. And so, going through COVID, everybody else was kind of stopping everything. We stopped for a little while, and then we just ratcheted right back up. But we made the decision we were going to steward through the finances, steward our staff, and steward the people in a way that we felt led to do. And I think God honored it, and the people certainly honored it, for sure. That we were running, 2,500 to 3,000 people a weekend. And I told her, I said, when this shakes out, we'll be a church of, between 500 to 700 people. And that's where it wound up. And now we've bounced back from that. We've growing again. But again, it came, that whole scenario, talking about financial stewardship, you never know what's coming at you. And if you're, my old boss used to say, most people bet on the come. They're betting on what is coming at them. And I've always been a guy of, I don't want to bet on what's coming towards me. I want to be prepared for whatever's coming at me. And so the people who live paycheck to paycheck, most often they're betting that they have the physical capacity, the mental capacity to make that paycheck on Friday come. But what if with all the what ifs, do you have any reserve? And at that time, our board of directors going into COVID, we had set a reserve that even though we were building, we would never go under it in what we would call our war chest. We would never go under it. And we went through the whole building process and never dipped below that. But it was mainly a protection of these people who have committed their lives to this house, to give up careers that out of the corporate world and come to work for us, the Ashley and Vickers who left a corporate job to come work with the church, the Evan Millies, all those people, we need to make sure that they're taken care of financially. So we were preparing for that all along, and having a savings account, having investments as a church to make sure that we could take care of the people. When I was in the corporate world, I never once worried about my paycheck. Well, but I have people on my staff at the church who, some of them worked a year without a paycheck. Not under my leadership, but other places. I'm like, that's a really hard thing to do. The church should be run like a business. The only time the church should not be run like a business is the moment that we start a church service. Other than that, we need to operate it and steward it like a business, and from those principles. And there's people that disagree with that, but it's worked for me.
Where do you think the mindset of the poverty gospel came in, and also like churches shouldn't be ran like a business? Where did that mindset all come from?
There's a lot of that. There's a big, there's another big push about this, because we're non-taxed or whatever, which is a misnomer. The only tax we don't pay as a church is property. We pay every other tax. We pay payroll taxes. We pay sales tax. So you have a large group of people who feel like the churches get certain special privileges, and so they don't feel like they deserve money. There's been a lot of people who have mishandled money. There's no doubt about that. Right. There's been no accountability with what happens with the money. But I would say that isn't just a church issue. We could go through massive charities that many people give to it. If you actually start looking into it, 10 cents of every dollar is actually going to the research of it. The other side of that is, but years ago there was this old thing, that money is the root of all evil. But that's a misquoting of the scripture. The scripture doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It says the love of money. And so when you put any emotion in front of money, money becomes bad. You can have angry money. You can have the love of money.
That's good.
Money, when you put emotions with money, man, things get crazy one way or the other.
Yeah.
Money is just money. The people behind it put the emotion with it. And there's always been this emotion with money in the church. And that's always been skewed. I think if the church is transparent and it's accountable in its finances, people will have no problem with it. It's when people don't know where their investments, like if you guys invested in Tesla today or whatever company, there's reports that come out and you pay attention to it. People pay attention. Okay, but if you didn't own, if I said, what's the stock of Coca-Cola today?
Couldn't tell you.
Because you're not invested in it.
That's right.
If you're invested in it, you would study it, you would look at, you would want to know what's going on with it. People invest themselves into church more than any other entity in the world. People are fully vested in it. Their finances are there, their heart is there, their life is there, their family is there. And the church has never been one to come back and say, hey, thank you for your investment. Here's what we did with it. There were 2 books that really helped me. So if you're listening to this, there's 2 books that really helped me.
We can link 'em, too.
One was It's Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. And if you gave money to SIU would send you a letter and say, thank you. We appreciate that. I mean, I would ask how many people have ever got a letter from the church and said, we really appreciate you giving here. And because of your giving, we've been able to do that. And so we do it as a practice. I try to send out about 10 letters a week. But it isn't just to people who give big gifts. We call it the 2 mites rule. There are many people who give to our house that they're not giving thousands of dollars, but to them, that is thousands of dollars. That's a big sacrifice. So the widow who gave 2 mites, Jesus paid attention to that. If Jesus paid attention to who was giving and what they were giving, I think leadership should too, and we should acknowledge it. Jesus acknowledged her gift so much that we still talk about it. And most people don't want to talk about it. So I think the church has had as much to play, or the entity of the church, or the organization of the church, has had much to play with the negative image of finances and money as the people who are hating on the church have had to play. You know, generalizations are usually wrong, but there's a reason why there's a generalization too. And so if we don't want people to say those things about us, then let us not give them the opportunity to say those things about us. So be above reproach, be honest and open. You know, in my leadership as pastor there, I've written, I think 17 checks. And that's because the payroll department, which is outsourced, forgot to run the payroll, and I had to write payroll. I do my best to not write checks. I do my best to not involve myself in certain areas of the finances. Not that I can't, not that I don't have the authority to do so. It's just not the best look. And so if we as leaders are to abstain from the appearance of evil, then let's do that. Let's not give the opportunity for it. And how we operate is to counterbalance all of those myths, I guess would be a better word. And then the other side of that is, if the church wants money and the church wants people to give, shouldn't we try to improve the life of the people so that they can better themselves to make more money? So, but for years we've beat people down and said, you know, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that. No, I think Christians should be in the marketplace. We should be leaders in the marketplace. People should be coming to us for the answers, and engage in those conversations. You know, all the leadership principles I've lived my whole life have come out of the Bible. And most of the leadership books that I read, I can parallel that to a scripture or a text. We should be in the marketplace and leading, and in trying to help our people improve their lives.
My favorite thing that you say is that you want to share the gospel with somebody, but it's a lot easier to share the gospel when someone's stomach is full or when they're not starving and that they have everything they need. And I think that's just so true, that we need everything in the natural world.
Oh, so I sit on the Poverty Commission for the state of Illinois, and we have a very serious issue. It's not just here, it's everywhere. And so my position has always been the government shouldn't have to be involved with feeding the hungry and doing those things. The church was supposed to be that entity, but we didn't do it. And so I got on the Poverty Commission to try to help government solve some of these issues. Government can't solve these issues. The church has a frontline look at poverty that government doesn't have. There's a pastor, I see poverty. I don't know. I just had this conversation on Sunday night with my senior executive pastor. I said, there's a family in our church that I know their status. I know where they're at. And when we make decisions in the church, I always want to consider them. If we make an event, almost all of our events are free. But if we were going to do something along those lines, does that family have access to it? They're working hard, but they're raising their grandchildren. They're working hard. And so I just did the math. For them to drive to our church is about $12. If they're working 40 hours a week, all right, so they just wiped out one of their hours of work, just driving. They go get A's. That wiped out another hour. How do we help those people? I mean, it's going to get tight. Taxes are taken out about 40% of that. Whether you start calculating income tax, property taxes, sales tax, all those taxes, you start looking at how many times your dollar is taxed. So the criticism should go to the people who have the opportunity to take all that money and don't spend it properly. Mm-hmm. But that being said, when it comes to poverty and doing those things, people say, well, the church is about sharing the gospel. It is. It very much is. But if people are hungry and they're in steeped poverty, I think the thing we can do to be the church, instead of just sharing them about eternity, is we want to talk to you about eternity. But man, you're struggling and suffering right now. And it would be very harsh of me to say, I'm only concerned about what happens after you die. And I could care less about what's going on right now. Because I would rather solve the issue now and build a bridge with them and then be able to talk to them about eternity. Mm-hmm. Jesus cared about where people were at right then and there. Otherwise, he wouldn't heal people. He wouldn't give the feeding of the 5,000 was during his church service. People were hungry. There was no McDonald's, and I crack this joke all the time. He took a Happy Meal, turned it into the Golden Corral. But the disciples are actually the ones who were going out and feeding the people. And if we look at that as our example, we should do that. So that's why we've done what we've done in Cairo. We have no intention of starting a church in Cairo. We're not there for that. Otherwise, what we're doing in our giving is we have an agenda with it. We want to give this to you so that you will. No, we want to give this to you. We're giving, the scripture talks about giving and expecting nothing in return. We're going to give this to you, and they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. It's not. We have no intention of starting a church there. We are not there to be the evangelistic crusade. There are other churches in that area that can do that. We want to feed the hungry. We want to help them. We now have 16 blessing boxes throughout Southern Illinois to feed people. We have a massive food shortage. People are hungry. And so we changed up how we bought food. We used to we're going to buy this and this. Well, we're Pop Tops because they don't have candle burners. So this year we moved to beef stew and ravioli because it's got more protein in it, to try to help them, versus tomato soup, which is just liquid based. They're going to have protein. Senator Fowler's helped me so much with that. We got to give them protein, something to sustain them. So we want to preach to them, we want to pray with them, but we are ignoring the most pressing need they have at that moment if we don't feed them. The church not being in debt allows us to do that. We can spend money on food. We're not spending it on a mortgage payment. And hey, I'm a director of a bank, so we're not in debt. We're not in interest. And there's a difference. Okay, there's business debts. There's those things, but we have the capacity to meet needs because we don't have debt. And the reason why is we have so many people in our church. The money that we spend at the church is the people's money that they've given that. So we have people in our church who have stewarded their finances well. They give to the church, and the church then in turn is not taking their money that they've stewarded well and then putting that into debt. Instead, we're taking what they've stewarded well. We're trying to steward well according to what the gospel has to say and meet the needs of the people. And because of that, people will give to vision. Mm-hmm. And if the vision is tied to provision for the people will give more to that. It's not given to make me more money as a salary as the pastor or whatever. That's why I work Ultimate. I work all the other things I do, is I personally don't want to be a burden on the church. I want to be able to take as much money as possible, put money into ministry and not into the administration of a church. Again, it's been told money's the root of all evil.
Right.
It's the love of money. And I think that's the test with God, is whether you believe in tithing or you don't believe in tithing. I would traditionally say the people who want to argue with giving automatically tell you where their heart is with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they want to fuss with it, and why are you demanding of that? Well, Corinthians doesn't demand it. Corinthians says you set it apart at the beginning of the week. You make a plan to give. Melissa and I, so let's not talk about anybody else. Let's talk about Melissa and I. Melissa and I make a plan at the beginning of the year of how much we're going to give to the church. And I've done many of the things in my life since I've been pastor, but before I was a pastor, I wanted to be the biggest giver I could be. Not the biggest giver of the church, the biggest giver I could be. Because, so my grandfather died when my dad was 10 years old. So my dad was 10 years old. He had 5 brothers and sisters and his mom. And at that time, women weren't in the workplace, but she's raising 6 kids. He's 10. And people would come by and they would buy chicken for their homes and they would eat it. And whatever was left, they would bring over and give to my dad's family. Well, I didn't understand all this until I was an adult, where my dad always ate white chicken when I was growing up. We'd go into Popeyes, he'd order chicken breast. I'm like, you don't need dark. Well, he didn't, because he had a connotation with that of how he was raised. They didn't have milk and they didn't have cheese if it wasn't for the Lions Club. When my dad passed away, the Lions Club showed up at the funeral because there was this anonymous donor that they finally figured out who it was. And it was my dad trying to repay the Lions Club for all those years that they gave him milk and cheese. All those years. So my family, my dad was a recipient of people's charity. He didn't consider it to be charity because they were only giving whatever they didn't want. Mm-hmm. So my dad raised me up to give people what you would want if you were the one in need. So if I eat name brand soup, I buy name brand soup to give to the soup kitchen. Melissa is anal retentive about dates on things. Mm-hmm. We don't eat outdated food. So I don't give my outdated food to a charity. I don't do that. That's just me. Melissa and I, we got married. I purpose to be the biggest giver I could be. I don't want to be better than, just for me, because there are people that are out there that are dependent upon it. And my family went through that. And my dad made sure that principle was given into our family. So I've worked the jobs I've worked and done the things I've done, not to just better myself, but there are people out there who are truly in need. And I want to make sure that I can be the biggest giver I can be. I can't be the biggest giver I want to be if I have more debt or things that I am demanded to pay, and then I can't position my money and my finances where I think it should go. So Melissa and I purpose to be out of debt, to get out of debt, so that we could do more than we've ever done in giving in the church. So I do all the other things I do, and even now as pastor, I earn income, but I'm doing that because I want to be the biggest giver I can be. Because there's going to be a final audit, because I believe in accountability. There's going to be a final audit of me, and I know this is your husband's favorite verse. It's Luke 12:48. To whom much is given, much is required. Much will be demanded from them. And so everything that I've been given that's in my hand, that I understand who owns it. I don't own it. I just want to be what he was. And he was the biggest giver. He gave his own life for us. So my view of money is the same way. When I stand before the Lord and I have to give that final audit, and he says, I gave this to you. And I said, oh no, I went and bought a pair of shoes with that. And I paid 18% interest on the Visa. And so my $180 pair of shoes turned into $5,000 over 30 years. Oh yeah, but did you feed? Did you help? Oh no, but those shoes are really great. I paid on them for 30 years and I've worn them for a month. Yeah. And so when you start looking at that, that's been my viewpoint of it is I'm going to stand before the Lord and I'm going to give an account. And I'm not going to give an account for what you told me to do or what you told me to do. I'm going to give an account for what he told me to do. And I feel like he's told me, as he's told all of us, I've given much. And a man in America, we really don't have problems. Most of us. I mean, there's people in America that do have problems. But even so, in our nation, we are blessed beyond measure. And we've been given a lot. There's a lot demanded of us too. And we should handle that with such great care. I think the world would be a different place if we looked at it like, I'm going to stand before the Lord and I'm going to give an account for this.
Mm-hmm.
I would handle it differently. Because I've been thinking I've been eating my cookies for all along I've been eating his.
Mm-hmm.
So Jason, I know you're a very busy man, and I really enjoyed this conversation and learned so much about your history I didn't even know.
And I don't normally talk about it.
Yeah.
By the way, you've never heard the words come out of my mouth. I'm too busy. I've never said that because I know God's given me this. He spared my life multiple times. So because he's given me my life, there's been much required. And so no, I don't sleep very much. But I'm going to make the best of my life and prayerfully make my life leave a mark somewhere that the world was better after I left it than when I found it. I just love people. I think people, are amazing. You know, you're gifted and you're gifted. We've had private conversations. There's a tremendous amount of great people in Southern Illinois. We have everything it takes, every resource in Southern Illinois to be a place that is great. And that's why I like being where I'm at. Trust me, there's a lot of other great organizations. I wouldn't partner with people if I didn't think that they wanted to make a difference. And the life of Farmer State Bank, from the owners of it to the CEOs of it, the conversations that we have in private, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think we could make a difference. And I think we're doing our best to leave it better than we found it. So we want to thank you for joining this episode of Isn't That Rich? And rich isn't money. The Bible defines rich as if you can find yourself in this life 2 or 3 good friends, you're rich. And so I pray that you're rich because I am.
We have to stop this podcast because I'm starting to tear up.
Man, I love Pastor Jason. I felt like I could just listen to him all day.
I could too. He is one of my favorite people, seriously, and has been such an influence in my life. But I learned so much on this episode about how to be a better steward of my own finances.
I did too. I loved how we mentioned that we should think of our finances as if they were someone else and we were handling that money for someone else, and maybe we would make better financial decisions.
Definitely. Well, we hope that you were encouraged by this episode and that you felt inspired to be a better steward of your own finances. If you want to know about anything we talked about in today's episode or any of the books that Pastor Jason recommended, they are linked in our show notes.
And as always, we hope you subscribe to our podcast and our newsletter and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening.